G'day, Daniel. How are you?
I'm well, Graham. Good to be with you.
Yeah, likewise. For those of you watching, my name's Graham Hawkins. I'm the CEO and founder of SalesTribe, and I'm joined today by Daniel Healy from Leading Teams. And Daniel, you guys are synonymous here in the Australian market with high performance, and I know you work with a lot of the AFL football teams and various other teams, and that's been the business, I think, over a long period of time. Tell us a little bit about Leading Teams and what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. So we have got a national presence here. I'm based in South Australia, but we've got a team across the country. The model that is now Leading Teams was founded 27 years ago in SA by a fella by the name of Ray McLean, who heads up our business. And it was born, as you say, out of sporting clubs. I was actually a young 18-year-old who was running around at a footy team in South Australia, a very underperforming and poor cultured football club. And our coach wanted to change that, and he ran into Ray. Ray was working at a RAF base down the road and training pilots in leadership and doing it very differently than what had been done historically and getting some great results. And so he wanted to try that out in the in the wider world. But he needed a guinea pig, I guess, and our footy club was it. And the concepts made sense to me as a young fella, and I was able to live through that and see a football club significantly change its culture. And then I had another experience in Melbourne with another footy team, and so I was a convert. And I continued to work my way through teaching and football until 6 years ago, and I realised that my passion lay in this area. So set up a business unit in South Australia, and now I'm a director of the company as well. So I'm really proud to say that I've come that full circle. And fundamentally, as you say, we started in the footy world, but most of our work now, whilst we're still proudly involved in the AFL and NRL, majority of our work is done in the corporate space. Ray's book, and for those who are listening out there who enjoy a read, the first book he wrote was Any Given Team. And whilst it may sound a little cliche, we're really strongly of the belief that the same principles that applied to those footy and sporting teams back then and still do will apply to any given team, be that sales, be that government, whatever. And fundamentally, we're in there working in the dynamic space. We're helping teams establish their culture, establish the agreed norms or the behaviours, work on relationships so that they can have more conversations than perhaps they haven't been having, which in turn obviously helps improve performance. And we use that term around high performance and high performing teams.
Very good. And, for those listening, the reason that Daniel and I are sitting here chatting is that we both have a sporting background. And so I've always been fascinated in team sports and high performance. And having spent 30 years now in a multitude of sales and sales leadership roles in the corporate world, I've always been interested in how to performance manage teams and get teams of salespeople working together and create the best performance possible. So that's always been a challenge for me in my career. And I'm frankly always fascinated in hearing from experts like yourself and your company, and have read Ray's book and loved it. It's an awesome read. I'm always interested in how some of those principles that are applied on the sporting field, and there's always those analogies or similarities between business and sport. How do we create the most high performing cultures and environments in the corporate setting, particularly in the sales department? And how can we learn from some of what you guys have been doing with all of your stuff over the past 27 years?
Yeah, and I think the exciting bit for me, I guess, or for us at Leading Teams from a commercial point of view, is probably when Ray was setting out to break new ground in this space 20 odd years ago. If someone talked about culture, they thought it was something that grew on yogurt, whereas now very much it's in fact, some would say it's an overused word. But we know, and I guess the feedback we get when we get from clients that now culture and leadership is a line item on their budget list, which that's significant for us. So probably even 10 years ago, we were someone who'd come in and do a day or two with groups, and we still get calls in October. Can you come and do a team building day for us before Christmas? And so respectfully, what's your outcome? What are you trying to achieve here? But the clients that are engaged strongly and that get it realize that it's an ongoing thing, just like we invest in all other aspects of our business. And I think fundamentally over time, what we've done, what the good organisations do and are working out more and more now, is that they're wanting to spend time in the dynamic space. Our high performance model has two parts to it, mechanics and dynamics. And when we variably ask groups, what percentage of time do you spend in the mechanics? The answer is generally 80 to 90 plus. We're not here to suggest that the mechanics, the how to sell in this case is not important, but we are here to challenge the 90-10 notion. And most people nod their head and agree, but when it comes to the actual flipping it, they find that tough.
It's really interesting, the concept, and I've been privy to some of the models that you use previously, which is why we're having this conversation. I think it's so relevant. I think we talked about this off camera, Daniel, but most of the sales teams that I've run, we use that term team pretty loosely, really, because when you look at the way sales individuals are measured, managed, and rewarded, the sort of KPIs and measurements that are in place for sales, you very, very seldom get a close-knit, what I call a close-knit team, or even any semblance of a team of individuals that are working together for the same common objective, because it's really just individuals who are being, driven to perform. So I've always found it as a sales leader really difficult to create teamwork the way I would in a sporting context in a sales team. But I know your models, where you talk about, the mechanics, it's so important to get some of that stuff right, isn't it?
Yeah, but you summed it up there yourself. I mean, sporting teams won't work if we're going to reward one player and there's been plenty of footy teams who've done this over the journey. You get X amount of dollars per goal you kick. Well, yeah, good luck seeing that fella pass the footy off. If we reward mids and forwards and backs in segregation from the whole unit, and we set it up beautifully. One of the sayings we use is the signs of great leadership are in the behaviour of the followers. They're behaving that way because we've set it up and we've said it's a dog eat dog world, go for your life. And we understand why we've done that. And we understand there is a level of success that goes with that. But don't turn around and be surprised then if they don't give a damn about each other. One of the we use whatever you water will grow, and if we want to water and foster this idea that go for your life. The other one that I always find strange, looking at it from afar, is that generally who will get promoted into leadership roles will be those that have the highest sales numbers. And yet, when I ask groups of people, and sales groups as much as anyone else, think of a leadership trait of a leader that you've admired over the journey, someone you've known. It'll be this school teacher or my parent or this coach or this boss, because they cared, they showed an interest, they trusted, they valued, they challenged me, they mentored me. It'll always come from the dynamic side. I've never had someone say because they're a gun salesman. And even when they talk about that aspect, they talk about the fact they mentored and brought me along for the journey. And yet we just go, bang, look at those numbers, we'll put that person in a leadership role.
That's exactly what's happened all the way through my career. It's, promote the guy who's selling the most and make him the manager or her the manager. And quite often, they've been good for a reason in that particular role, but put them into the coach's role or the leader's role, and they fail miserably because it's a totally different skill set, right?
Well, and sadly, they often then become compromised in their actual ability to sell as well, because the mechanics part. This is not about pulling the stars down. This is about aligning the stars with the rest of the group in a common bond, a common purpose for the greater good. I guess in my 6 or 7 years with leading teams, some of my more satisfying moments have been when I've been able to convince leaders of sales groups to change the remuneration structure, change the bonus system to at least have in part a collective bonus. And look at me, we both look at each other, what a surprise. It's changed the behavior of the people.
Of course, compensation drives behavior. And I've had this argument, and we talked about this previously as well. I've had this argument so many times with my senior leaders as a sales director, that if we want to get the right behaviors, you've got to put in place the right measurements, right? And the compensation for most sales teams has been a combination of, base and then an at-risk component of your total compensation. And if you hit your numbers, you'll earn this big chunk of commission. And what does that do? It drives self-serving behavior, which is actually counterproductive in many ways. And it creates this toxic sort of dog-eat-dog culture where teamwork just cannot thrive.
And I'm not suggesting, and there'll be some sitting out there listening, yeah, but we've been successful. And I'll sit here and say, yeah, you have been successful. The only question we'll ask is how much more successful could you have been? And can you be? I guess that's the difference. I've seen some really horrendous examples of behaviour where people have, and they're not spiteful people, they're not toxic people, but the environment has been set up that way. And again, not with that in mind. The intent was to do as well as we can for the business. The outcome can be pretty ugly, and leaders can be scratching their head and said, "How's this happen?" So but it's a real paradigm shift, and it's a real leap of faith to say, "Wow, we're gonna overhaul this. No one else does it like this. Wow, this is scary, but it can be really rewarding if people can take that jump." The other piece, Graham, that is an even further stretch is to actually reward on behaviour as well. See, we're a big believer that if we have a set of agreed behaviours and people live by them, the reason they're there is not just to appease some HR staff member in the business because they're fluffy, feel good stuff. It's actually because if we live those behaviours more often than not, we will get the results anyway. Yeah. So if we have a behavioural reward component as part of the remuneration structure, now that's a bit more subjective and it's conversations with leaders, etc. Then people say, it's not just win at all costs. You know, we've seen examples of the Australian cricket team and other sporting teams where they've had this mantra, win at all costs, and we see what happens. Yeah. And it's the mess is, you know, ugly, and it's hard to clean up. So that's the other stretch to say, wow, could we actually put in a behavioural component in the remuneration in the conversation? And doing that again, it just what'll happen though, the scary bit, Graham, will be that people, if they did that, and the reason they're resistant to it is they know sometimes they will lose one of their best salespeople, because quite often they are the most toxic in the business.
Yep, I've seen that many times, sir. What you're saying effectively, Daniel, is that, you know, it all comes back to leadership, right? And I keep arguing now. In fact, I've written posts about this, and I've written in my own book about the need to change how we measure, manage, and reward salespeople to get the right behaviour. You know, there was a great article or report, sort of a paper written many years ago, and I can't remember the guy's name who's written it now, someone Kerr, where the headline perfectly describes what's inside this, 1,000-word paper. The headline of the title of the paper is "The Folly of Rewarding Behaviour A and Expecting Behaviour B." Mm-hmm. And it's obvious, isn't it? But yeah. What you're saying is all this comes back to leadership. And leaders now in a corporate context or a sales context have to be thinking about, right, how do we create the right behaviours that give the buyer what the buyer now needs in this kind of new world, post-pandemic world that we work in? How do we create behaviours that will give the buyer the outcomes that the buyer needs? And then the leap of faith, as you say, the leap of faith is if we do the right things at each step of the buying journey, then the sale and the revenue and our success will sort of take care of itself.
Yep. And I think what I've seen is quite often salespeople behave pretty well to the external, to the customer, because they want to get the sale. When you reflect on their behaviour there versus their behaviour to their buddy alongside them, it's completely contrary. Now, I always love Richard Branson's line, the customer shouldn't come first, your staff should come first, each other should come first. We as the consumer can see when things aren't right behind there. The idea that I will treat you well, but we're a toxic bunch in here, it shows up in the end. So for me, it's the combination of the two.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm fascinated in all of the work that you guys are doing, because, as I say, it's been one of my big challenges in my own career, is that just getting leadership and the sales team and the marketing department, and now we've got customer success. We've got all these people trying to contribute to, overall company performance. How do you bring them all together, and how do you get them all to understand a common language and all the stuff that you guys talk about?
It's really, I had a fella yesterday who's head of a sales team in a radio and print media group at the moment, obviously really challenging time right now. But he talked about his relationships he's got with his sales teams, and he says they're really strong. He says, but on the other hand, the production mob over there, our relationship's not great. And it is a bit of us versus them. Oh, it's not fair. They got all the glory, or what. And the point, and we challenge, so why do you think it is? Are they not important? Yeah, of course they're important. They don't feel that important. Why not? And their answer was because they don't feel like they've been part of the journey. They just get told to do their bit. And so it's really simple, but not straightforward, and it takes work. But the key bit initially is getting a group buy-in to a common purpose.
Yeah. And Daniel, doesn't that start right at the top of the
100%. But the challenge, the difference though, mate, for us is the leader not telling the group what the purpose is. The leader sitting down and say, why do we exist as an organisation? If we're a leadership team, why do we exist as a team? Yeah. And as soon as the answer comes back making money, we push back pretty hard, because I'm not sure the young junior coming in who's on a first year wage gets that excited about making someone up their money. That's not going to get me out of bed. The story I love to tell is the one about man on the moon back in the 60s. And the story goes, JFK was doing a tour of NASA back in 62 and wandering around with the dignitaries, and went over and chatted to a janitor and asked the janitor, what are you doing? And the janitor said, I'm helping put man on the moon. Now, that was 7 years before Neil did or didn't set foot on the moon, depends what you believe. And this fellow was cleaning dunnies. And so when I tell that story to groups, I say, who was responsible for that answer? And some people say, oh, the janitor. And I say, no, it wasn't the janitor. And then we work it out that, as you say, it was the lead. It was someone who was leading that person. Someone had got that janitor to buy in. Yeah. And then I asked the question, so what's the outcome of the janitor having a response like that? And someone quite rightly said, bloody clean dunnies. And the reality is that people are going to play their role, and you're going to get, we talk about discretionary effort from people. They're going to go over and above. They are going to answer the call for their buddy. They are going to go out of their way to make sure that customer has this wow experience, because they feel something greater than just turning up 9 to 5.
Well, it's alignment, isn't it? I wrote a post recently, Daniel, about a company that we're dealing with out of Israel called Monday.com, tech company, and they're going gangbusters at the moment. They're in a great space, and they've got a really good culture and an amazing approach. They've actually been one of the pioneers in removing commission from sales teams, and instead creating alignment by giving salespeople, with tenure, equity in the company, so that everybody's aligned. And it seems to be working really, really well. They've written articles about it themselves, and getting alignment and leadership to all agree that this is the objective. I did years ago, I did a high performance program, and the one thing I took away from it was this disconnect that often exists between strategic direction of the business and the way that the internal operations are managed. And it all came down to not just leadership, but clarity of objectives.
Quite often that strategic piece is done on a weekend retreat somewhere and then stuck in a top drawer, and the crew don't see it. We understand it has to be set by someone up here. It doesn't mean we can't get the group to buy into what it looks like.
That's right.
And so the beauty of having that comment, I get really excited about doing the purpose piece with groups, because often it'll be quite a clinical, sanitized corporate jargon, 20-word slogan, and we push really hard. This has got to be something that resonates and attaches with you and gets a hair stand up on the back of your neck. We had a brokerage group that I had, and they had quite a normal corporate one, your best customer service, yada yada. And when I'd come back, so what's our purpose again? And they'd all try and remember the 20 words that were on there. And in the end, we're just here to simplify finance. Bang, 3 words. Oh. And I said to the receptionist, can you attach yourself to that? She said, yeah. I said, how? Well, every time someone, the key bit with any purpose is that anyone from receptionist to MD or CEO can feel some attachment. People in the back office versus and the sales. And they all could. And we have great conversations every time I go back. Tell me how we've simplified finance in the last 3 weeks, and they get great excitement and pride in telling me that someone rang up. They had two different loans. We could have made more money out of them by keeping their 2 loans, but really the reality was for them, if we were being true to our purpose, simplifying finance, we merge them, we save them money. We don't make as much ourselves, but we are achieving our purpose, and they get great satisfaction of that. Now, of course, lost money on that engagement over long term, that becomes a trusted customer who comes back and recommends them to other people. So it's very exciting when you can see a group, and that's a staff of over 100, when they can really attach themselves to a purpose.
It sounds, as you're talking, none of this is rocket science, is it? It sounds so obvious in some way, and yet for some reason in business we overcomplicate everything. I'm a farm boy. I'm a country boy. I grew up in the country, and I have a tendency to want to boil things down to the basics and go back to basics. And what you're saying is that there's some real merit in doing that, right? Just boiling things down and simplifying.
Well, coming from another farm boy, although my mates would say I didn't do too much work on the farm, but a country boy, and I do often joke, and maybe it's not a joke, that maybe it was the simplicity of Ray's model back 20 odd years ago that attached. I was an 18-year-old kid, so I said, so you're telling me if I turn up and behave like we've just agreed, I'm going to get respect in this group, and I'm going to get a voice and a say, and I can be part of something. That made sense to me, and I liked that. And I thought, I want to be in that sort of place. I always say when I go through our model, I said, I haven't resplit the atom there, have I? It is pretty simple. But it takes hard work and persistence, and it also involves, just rolling the sleeves up and getting serious about the culture piece. And at the end of the day, people struggle to prioritize the culture.
Yeah, they do, and all sorts of vested interests come into play, and everyone's thinking short term when they should be thinking long term. And
that's the bit we haven't been able to educate people well enough. And again, the successful organisations do that. Relationships and which is culture, and that culture and behaviors will get us the results. See, the people that want to stick in the mechanics, they're very task-focused people. They are going to take some convincing that this fluffy relationship stuff actually will get us over the line. And so that's the challenge, and it's really rewarding when those sort of people, the penny drops to them and say, I get it. Yep, the relationship bit comes first.
Yeah, no, it normally always does. The other thing, Daniel, that I remember from a high performance training years ago was this concept of, they called it proactive distraction management. So removing anything inside the team that creates a distraction that might, divert attention away from the objective. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's why but for me, again, it comes back to that purpose. If a group have got a clearly defined purpose, I just say every decision, every conversation you should be having should relate back to it. Is what we are doing now going to help us, or use that example before, is it going to help us simplify finance? Oh, actually, probably not. Well, let's stop doing it. Yeah. Now, ironically, anytime we're having bitchiness between divisions or arguments across group, we probably could ask ourselves, hey, is what we're doing now helping us achieve our purpose? The answer would obviously be no. Let's stop doing it. Let's think about the bigger picture. But again, you said it before, that'll take leaders to continue to focus on the bigger picture. Yeah. And when self-interest takes over that's when we have trouble. So often, sadly, the distraction you talk about is personnel. And that's one of the challenges. We talk about weight of numbers, and when you get strong buy into a certain culture, an agreed set of behaviors and a purpose, over time, it'll be really clear the group are going here. That person who doesn't want to jump in, that gap becomes wider. But until that culture is clearly articulated, it just becomes this blend, this grey area, and they can fit right in. Yeah. One of the groups I was working with a few years ago, it was, and I don't want this to sound too cutthroat, but it was almost their badge of honor that every month I'd come back, someone had left the building, and I said, oh, yeah, how are you feeling about that? Well, we're sad, we don't like, but they've self-selected because they can see the journey we're on. And that was actually a government organisation, and often government don't jump in like others, like a sporting group will. But that was almost their celebration to say, that doesn't mean that person's wrong. It just means they're wrong for our organisation, and they've been able to work that out. Well, how have they worked it out? Because they've seen another direction we're going in. Yeah. That's your challenge. And that's, again, what leaders can be quite scared of. I've seen footy teams. I went and worked with a footy team 5 or 6 years ago. And at the start of the engagement, this is the team that had been really poorly performing. And they had a full forward who'd kicked all their goals for them last year, but in a poor team. And he was wanting more money, and they weren't sure whether they wanted to keep him or not. And I said, well, what's he like? And they said, oh, he's not super fit. He's a bit lazy, but he kicks all their goals and we're no good. So we've got to keep him. I said, well, you know what I'm going to say. If we could put culture first, I'd love that. Anyway, the decision got taken out of their hands because he did go somewhere else for more money. And what do you know? The fella in the reserves comes up and wins the medal for the goal kicking in the competition, and the team plays in a prelim final. Now, I'm not suggesting that's the only reason, but Ray, our founder, is often saying the graveyards are full of indispensable people, and this idea that, if I lose that salesperson, we're gone, we're done. What people don't realise is the damage that person is doing to the organisation, and you can almost hear the collective sigh of relief when that person walks out the door. And some of the more junior up-and-comers come in and say, oh, thank you for doing that. I can't believe it took you that long. Like, there's all this conversation happening afterwards that perhaps could have happened before.
Yeah, I used to work with a boss who would refer to that type of person as like a puppy dog. They give everyone lots of joy occasionally and lots of fun, but occasionally they'll go and shit in the corner too. Yeah.
Well, my experience with puppy dogs, it's more than occasionally with the second bit, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's right. Daniel, tell us, in your experience, you obviously span, team performance in sporting, on the sporting arena or in the sporting field, but you also work in the corporations. What's the fundamental difference between the two? If you could put your finger on one or two sort of main differences, sport versus corporate.
Fundamentally, very little. That's the point. Yeah. People want to be part of something. People are a team. The only difference I see is at elite sport, the turnaround, the result, the scoreboard is there for everyone to see in a very short time. And if we do a session with a sporting team, by the time we chat to them the next day, they've acted on whatever we've done. Like, they are faster to move. Yeah. I love working in small to mediums with the MD in the room because they're more like that end. government work sometimes can be more challenging because it can be slower to move. That's the continuum I see. But in the end, at the end of the day, people say, oh, you have to adapt your stuff from sport to corporate. Well, no, because it's still going to come back to those genuine conversations we want people to have, and people find them hard. They find them hard because they haven't got a relationship and they haven't got an agreed framework. Yeah. So fundamentally, not much, to be really honest.
Yeah. Mate, I love it. I think there's so much more here to talk about, and you're talking about some of your frameworks there. I think maybe in the next conversation we should have a look at a couple of those frameworks if you're up for that.
Yeah, I think we could explore the relationship piece a bit more, and why people don't, the importance of it, and why people don't tend to go there and prioritise it. There's absolutely some conversations in that, and even an agreed framework and how you put that together, and what's the benefit of doing that, for sure.
Well, let's do that in the next conversation, if you like. I'm keen to keep this going because this is so relevant and so interesting to me. I'm slightly biased because I'm a sports person to begin with, and but it's so relative in terms of everything you're saying for the current situation that we all find ourselves in the corporate world, and in particular sales. And I'd love to explore some of it further. I mean, this idea of teamwork, and then extrapolating that out to a modern buying context now, where buyers want to actually go on a long-term journey with you as well. So the buyer almost now becomes part of the team as well. You've got to be able to manage that relationship too.
100%. And we always say, whenever I start a day with a group, I said, so we go through the culture piece and what it is, and this idea that it's about, the behaviours we reward, etc. When does this get challenged the most? And people always say under pressure. And it's quite timely we're having this conversation, because there ain't been much pressure like there is right now in most work environments. And that's been the rewarding piece, to see some of our clients and the way they've handled it, and the way the team have given the leaders feedback. And the leaders will come back and unashamedly say it's because of the work we've been doing around this relationship space and around this culture space. Those who've invested in it till now will come through this a lot better than others. So I think it's a great conversation to be happening right now, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I like, I mean, you've mentioned culture a lot there, and it's pretty rare for me, in my experience, my limited experience, to have worked in cultures that are, in the sales department, that are not toxic in some way. They're normally quite dog eat dog in cultures. But Peter Drucker said it, the famous business writer, many years ago, where he said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it's a famous quote, but he said it a long time ago. So there's a recognition that culture is critically important. And I think we should have this conversation again. Yeah,
there's a recognition in theory, and we all like to quote that quote. But as I said to you, when I ask teams, they say 90-10 the other way. That's the bit that we want to push back on and challenge it. We still would always say that your conversations and your culture will drive your performance rather than the other way around. And happy to have that discussion as long as anyone wants to listen to us.
All right. Well, let's schedule another one and talk a bit more about the model, and perhaps you can take us through some of the leading teams models around that relationship stuff you talked about, because I think, as you said, this is just so relevant for right now.
Yeah, it sounds good. I'd love to do that.
Beautiful. All right. Well, let's leave it there for now, and we'll talk again soon, shall we?
Brilliant. Thanks for your time, Graham.
Cheers, Daniel.